Welcome back to The Price of Business. I'm your host, Skipper Price, continuing my conversation with my good friend Brian Domitrovic. You can find him also at Forbes. He's got some great articles over there. How frequently do you write for Forbes?
Every 2 weeks, so I'll have a column up again next Monday.
Yep, and chairman of the history department, the history department over there at Sam Houston State University. How long have you been in that role?
I've been in that role for 4 years, and I should tell you, Kevin, I'm taking a sabbatical next year. I'll be at the University of Colorado Boulder next year, beginning in August, as the visiting scholar in conservative thought and policy. They have a very prominent position for kind of a national conservative, and they want me to occupy that post next year, and I'm going for 1 year.
That is awesome, but then you'll be back to chair after that?
Right back here in Houston. Yep,
we'll miss you for that year, no question about that. And where did you say you were going to be in Colorado?
They have a position called the Visiting Scholar in Conservative Thought and Policy, and it's been occupied by Steve Hayward and by Brad Berzer, and it's an attempt to bring kind of a prominent conservative into the kind of notoriously liberal university environment, Boulder, liberal university town.
One of the most liberal. It's crazy. If you ever want to know how liberal it is, go during the fall or spring. Make sure they're in session and just walk around Main Street, and you can tell just by the shirts they wear. About I love eating conservatives for lunch and things like that. It's really ferocious.
Well, I'll give them some red meat if they want it for lunch.
Yeah. Well, you better. I would suggest you strengthen your life insurance protection as well. Brian, you had a great conversation in February, and I know you don't agree with her. I don't agree with Janet Yellen, the chair of the Federal Reserve, but I gotta admit at least that it took some serious props on her part to even have a conversation with a couple of dozen conservatives that included someone like you.
Yeah, back last year, Ben Bernanke suggested that maybe all these critics of the Fed should have some audiences with the chair, and then Yellen picked up on the suggestion. She actually met first with the left-wing group back in November, and then she met with 12 of us in February, and 5 of us made presentations to her. I was one of those. My remarks are printed in Forbes. And, she listened very respectfully. I don't think there's any question that she absorbed our views, and my basic point, again, you can read the transcript on my Forbes column, was when we had something that approximated the gold standard in the 1980s and 1990s, we had a killer economy. And when we decided to go for fiat money, forget about the price of gold in the 1970s and the 2000s, we had a rather terrible economy. So the choice is clear. Have a sound dollar against gold and just watch the economy roar.
Yeah, absolutely. And who are some of the other people that joined you for that meeting in February?
Yeah, the speakers were me, Mark Miles, who's a longtime associate with Arthur Laffer, John Allison, who at that point was president of the Cato Institute, Norbert Michel from the Heritage Foundation, and then Judy Shelton, who's a great protege of Robert Mundell's, of the founder of Supply Side Economics, who I wrote the book about. We were the 5 main speakers, and then there were some others there with us, too, and Ralph from the American Principles Project organized the meeting.
Yes, absolutely. I think Judy was at the Atlas Economic Research Foundation.
Yep.
Yeah,
Judy's great.
She is brilliant. In fact, that entire list was brilliant. That's a good crowd to hang out with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Janet Yellen was there with Yale Brainerd, and one of the 5 Fed governors, and I don't think there's any question that she absorbed everything that we were talking about. And she has a clear understanding, she's heard it, of what our criticism is, and she has done a little better than Bernanke. She hasn't gone crazy with the money printing like her predecessor has. And as Larry Kudlow and I have talked about in his radio show, that's probably one of the reasons the American economy has bucked up ever so slightly under her tenure. It's that she's clearly a little more afraid of doing monetary blowouts than her predecessor. And therefore, the country's more confident about its currency.
That's interesting, yeah. And it was so odd because, Ben Bernanke was supposed to be very similar to his predecessor, but he wasn't really at all, was he?
The problem with Ben Bernanke, if I may say this too about Janet Yellen, is they have PhDs in economics. I mean, we have to stop this PhD standard. As chairman of the Fed, James Grant talks about this. PhDs in economics can lend a crazy self-confidence to these people. Bernanke was so confident because of all this academic research. And academic research is not, I'm sorry, part of the real world. And he just went full speed ahead into those monetary blowouts. I think somehow, even though she has a PhD, Yellen is less absolutely confident that all this academic Keynesianism really works out in the real world.
Yeah, absolutely. Refresh my memory. What was Volcker's credentials?
Paul Volcker was a member of he worked for the Treasury Department from the 1950s on. He worked at the New York Fed and at the Treasury Department. He worked in Nixon's Treasury. And in 1975, he hired a guy named Larry Kudlow when he was president of the New York Federal Reserve Bank. And Larry Kudlow, I'm writing a book about JF KTEK on CNBC. He worked for him in writing speeches for him in the 1970s. Now, Volcker was a hard money guy. So working for the Fed and for the Treasury, he was aghast when Nixon went off gold in 1971, and then had to manage that as president of the New York Fed in the 1970s, and then, of course, created what was essentially a de facto gold standard under Reagan in the 1980s. Mm-hmm. Didn't have a PhD.
Yeah. No, actually his highest degree, I think, was a master's degree, and so that's interesting. And as you pointed out, he had more of a political background rather than an academic background.
Right.
Yeah.
But the first two academics are Bernanke and Yellen, and now it seems like we have to have an academic, and I think we should stop that completely. We should go back to money guys with the money touch, as Theodore Roosevelt put it, instead of academics who do not have the money touch. By definition, they don't. They're academics. They're not in the real world of affairs and money.
Yeah, no question about it. So with the presidential campaign, who do you like so far?
I like a lot of them. I like I like Carly Fiorina, Scott Walker, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, Rick Barry, Jeb. I could go on. If we have sound money, tax cuts, regulatory relief, confidence in America, we will see the great kind of economic renaissance that this country's prone to when it gets it right.
Brian Domitrovic, great guest as always. Delighted to have you on. When does your tenure begin over in Colorado?
August 15th.
August 15th. Well, I'm excited for you, and we'll have to get you on. Thank God for phones. We'll get you on even from there.
That'll be great.
All right, BrianDomitrovic.com. Check him out there. Check him out at Forbes, and always check him out because he's got great content. And we'll have an article about this conversation over at USDailyReview.com, and you're listening to The Price of Business.